Let me just share my screen. Uh, thank you guys for coming back. This is part two, where I have another guest speaker for an organization here with me. So let's get started. Uh, okay, just being sure people can talk. Yeah, okay. So this next organization is called Synaptic Interaction, and Synaptic Interaction is a student-led initiative focuses on both raising funds for and awareness about neurodegenerative diseases and normalizing discussions about mental health. It is a neuroscience nonprofit and is currently raising funds for care packages for the unhoused in Detroit. Gotta say, a lot of amazing progress. So the Instagram is at synaptic_interaction. And so you can find everything there and you won't regret it. So with that being said, I'll let you take it away from here and enjoy.
Yeah. So, hi everyone. I'm Davis. I'm the founder and president of Synaptic Interaction. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the neuroscience behind dyslexia. And I'm going to try to keep this at kind of like an introductory level just because it can get a little complicated. So, just make sure if you have any questions, you can always leave those below. Okay, so dyslexia is defined as a neurodivergent learning difference. This is from the DSM-5, which is basically a classification system for every neurological disorder or psychiatric disorder that is currently in use today. They update it like every 10 to 15 years. So, neurodivergence is going to refer to any abnormal brain functioning or like patterns of brain functioning. So, that just means it diverges from what's considered neurotypical, which is just how most people's brains work. And it's also typically comorbid with other neurodiverse traits. So, oftentimes, this is ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, or anything of the sort that falls into neurodivergence. So then moving on, we have the neuroanatomy behind dyslexia, which basically how it impacts the nervous system as a whole. So the first thing I'd like to say is that much more research is going to have to be done before we can fully understand the neuroanatomy, just because actually neuroscience is a pretty up and coming field and there's a lot to be understood. And with dyslexia, it hasn't been the easiest thing to research because there hasn't been a ton of funding towards research. So all of this would be with a grain of salt because we're not completely in a state where we know everything about dyslexia from a neuroscience perspective. But based on current imaging, which is MRIs, EEGs, fMRIs, these are all different kinds of brain scans. Dyslexia is likely related to abnormalities in the temporal and parietal areas of the brain. So that's just kind of the areas around your ears where your brain would be, and then basically in the upper middle part of your head, that would be the parietal lobe, and your temporal lobes are kind of by your ears. And we'll talk a little bit more about how each of those contributes to dyslexia on the next slide. Okay, so with the parietal lobe, it's mostly responsible for perceiving your senses. So that's going to be, all of your senses, including most notably with dyslexia, sight. Um, so that's going to be causing a lot of the symptoms with dyslexia, and a lot of different processing issues is going to be with the temporal lobe because that really mainly focuses on encoding and processing information. So that kind of explains the brunt of how dyslexia works, but then when you kind of want to delve deeper into like the intricacies, you need to go a little bit deeper in the brain than just the general region. So then on the next slide, we can kind of see an image of how it would look like for someone's brain who has dyslexia and the regions that are impacted um, for the visual slide. Yeah, there we go. So you can see if you look at this little yellow blob, it's a little hard to see, but this would be the frontal part of your brain that's impacted, which we didn't talk about, but it's another notable region. And then the main area is this blue, and that's the temporal parietal cortex. This is where most of your symptoms from dyslexia are going to arise from. And then you also have your occipital temporal cortex. So that's going to be involved with the sight part of dyslexia, and then also the processing and how they work together. Because a lot of times it's easy to like think, this part of the brain does this and this part of the brain does this, but in reality, they're all working together, every part. So not everything's as plain and simple as it happens right here. A lot of it's how it works with different regions of the brain. So then on the next slide, we are going to talk about the neurochemistry that goes on with dyslexia. So as you can see here, dyslexia is going to likely be influenced by brain chemicals known as neurotransmitters. Oh, I think you might want to go to the next slide. Yeah, there we go. So there's a bunch of different neurotransmitters, even different categories of neurotransmitters. But the one that's most relevant to dyslexia is glutamate. And glutamate is known as an excitatory neurotransmitter, which means it basically is going to stimulate your nervous system, kind of like caffeine would, how that kind of keeps you up. That'd be kind of similar to what glutamate does, but it'd be at different levels. And what it can actually do is it can cause neurons to fire too fast. And when some neurons are firing too fast and other neurons aren't firing, they're firing at a normal pace, you're going to have neurons that aren't firing at the same time. And this can actually cause a lot of issues because really to process things correctly, your neurons have to be firing in at least a coherent pattern. And that's not always happening with dyslexia. So that can also kind of explain some of the processing difficulties that people have with dyslexia. And then, yeah, I think we basically explained that for the next one. Firing too fast, your brain's going to confuse signals. That's kind of actually also what happens in seizures. So if you would think about glutamate levels maybe at like 10% of what they would be with seizures, that could kind of be what you're seeing normally. And then maybe like 15% would be what you might be seeing with dyslexia. And obviously at certain times, it could be worse than at other times. And then it makes it harder to process information. So then on the next slide, we can see like the visuals of what's going on with the neurotransmitters in the neuron. Yeah, the next one. Yeah, there we go. So you can see that there's the sending neuron. That's the neuron on the left. So you could think about like a signal going from the neuron on the left to the neuron on the right. But I guess a little neuron firing lesson. There's actually space between neurons. So electricity can't actually just cross this space. This is known as the synapse or synaptic gap or synaptic cleft. There's a lot of names for it. So in this space between neurons, instead of electricity just going from one to another, there's the neurotransmitters, which is what we were just talking about. So the actual symptoms you're going to get from neurotransmitters are going to be when they're in the synapse for the most part. So when we're saying you have too much glutamate, it would be too much glutamate in this little in extracellular space in the synapse. And that's going to cause your symptoms. So you can see it's leaving from these vesicles, which are just kind of like these pockets full of neurotransmitters from the left, and they're going to receptors on the neuron on the right. So there's a couple of reasons that there could be too much in here. One is that the neuron on the left could be continually reuptaking or basically taking these neurotransmitters back, or the neuron on the right could have its receptors blocked, which we won't get into today. Okay, and then on the next slide, we can see the visual from like a more macro scale, so much bigger. So we can see right here, we have the prefrontal cortex, and then here's where glutamate might be coming from, and then it's going to be flowing into the areas affected by that are affected by dyslexia. And you can kind of just see that pattern here, just going from one part of the brain to another. And that kind of also goes into how they're all working together. Okay, so then moving on to the next slide, we have current treatments for dyslexia. So there actually isn't currently a drug that directly treats dyslexia. However, we can treat it through therapy, which a lot of people have used. Just kind of training yourself to properly encode things, or at least encode things without having as many difficulties. So, this actually comes from neuroplasticity. So, this is basically how your brain can rewire itself, which it might not be the most technical way to talk about it, but it's basically how you can retrain your brain to think in different patterns. And that's where the rewiring comes from. And this can actually improve your ability to encode things properly. Um, but that's kind of all that's out there right now. Again, this is coming from, there's not a ton of research that's going on, but we can definitely get there in the future. And then continuing on the neuroplasticity, just that rewiring allows reading and linguistic processing to improve over time. So as you go through more and more training with yourself or with a professional, you can kind of lessen the effects of dyslexia. And then on our last slide, we just kind of have a visual for how neuroplasticity works. Yeah, there we go. And it's just like when you're activating your neurons, you can have like and you're doing it very often, you can actually just make those patterns strengthen over time, and eventually it's going to change the structure of your firing patterns, strengthen them, and then eventually just reinforce a different kind of processing, which is um, a way that dyslexia can be treated. And yeah, that's everything we have for you today.
Okay, thank you so much for being here today. It truly is a pleasure with you speaking with us today. Uh, I just have, since we're like in the additional break time or Q&A, I just wanted to ask, like, how does it feel presenting this information with you today?
Oh yeah, well, it's definitely it's a really fun thing to do because it's just something that doesn't have a lot of conversation around it, and neuroscience in general isn't discussed as much as it should be, nor is dyslexia. So I think just normalizing that conversation is definitely a good thing to have, and just for people to reference in the future too.
Amazing. So, have you, uh, let's talk about your organization. So, like, why did you decide to go on that route, um the focus of it, and like how did you grow and keep going till now?
Yeah, well, I've always been interested in medicine for a really long time. And then with basically with the pandemic, and I just noticed how a lot of people were having a lot of trouble with their mental health. And I wanted to see if there was anything I could do to like lessen the stigma so we could talk about mental health more, have like mental health be as prioritized as physical health. So that's kind of where the mental health aspect of our organization comes from. And then another part of the conversation I wanted to spark was about neurodegenerative diseases. So these are diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Huntington's, where it's basically your neurons degrading over time, and they are so like prevalent today. Basically, almost everyone knows someone, or at least knows someone who had someone pass away from Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. Huntington's is more rare, but it also is out there. So just having people out there who know that they're supported was very important, and then also that they can get some more information in a very accessible form, because we just use Instagram posts to basically make like quick little infographics about neurodegenerative disease. So I think that also helps people understand them more, which is part of our goal too.
Amazing, just really amazing. Probably like maybe our last question before we head into the break and transition to the next Zoom link, which is still not Linktree. Um, do you guys have like what is it? Do you guys have like a team, or do you have like an advisor that's helping you, or is it really just a group of community teenagers like internationally, or just like international part?
Yeah. Well, our team right now is all national. We have a couple people from Texas. But most of the people working in my organization are in my area. So yeah, we have a team of a few people working on different things. I mainly am like in charge of like events kind of like these, and then also managing the Instagram, but we also have people working on like making a TikTok page for us, and then working on articles that we're going to hopefully publish soon, and then working on a podcast. So we definitely have like a group of people who are all working on different things. Um, and we're still kind of in like our startup phases because we started in April of last year. So a lot of that time's been spent like building like the groundwork for our organization. Like doing like weekly posts on Instagram to like gain some more people that actually like know about our initiative. And then in the future, we're hoping to kind of expand and have a larger impact on more people.
Amazing. I love it. I love how organizations can just start from the ground up and then just with patience and determination and work, we can reach our goals and aim and branch with um, people internationally. As it doesn't happen like nationally or in the community, but also internationally, our communities they experience it. So I love your message. I love your work. And let's just hope to keep going and keep determined.
Yeah,
So that's it for this part. Now we'll transition to part three. And once again, thank you so much for talking with us and doing all the work that you're doing. So thank you so much.
thank you.
Now we're going to transition and end this meeting, and we'll see you in part three with one of our live guest speakers named Amelia, talking about her life with dyslexia. So that should start at, I'm guessing I said at, let me see, okay, um, at 11 o'clock. So we actually have a long break. Um, but that's okay since we all kind of need a break in between everything. So, yeah, see you guys really soon at 11 with Amelia. And then closing final remarks on our last day of our Dyslexia Awareness Conference. Thank you.